Well, let me ask you something, ladies. Well, I won't put it in the form of a question. I'll make it a statement. I have tonight, I have done a psychological trick to you. You may call it a dirty trick. I think it's a good thing to have done. I have now set every one of you in this audience so you have changed forever, whether you realize it or not. I'm going to point out how. When I got back from World War II, thinking that I had saved the world from any more terrorism and tyranny and so forth, since then there's been 18 people convicted of treason to this great country. 17 of them have been Jews like the Rosenbergs, Harry Gold, Brothman, Moskowitz, Harry Gold, and the whole parade of Jews. After this speech tonight, ladies and gentlemen, you know what's going to happen to you as has happened to me once? From now on, whenever they haul out one of these little communist spies, you'll notice the length of the nose. You'll never forget it. When they tell you that the names of the New English spies are the Krogers, you'll notice that it says in the paper in parenthesis, Cohens. You'll notice that when it says up in Canada they catch Harry Rose and Sam Carr as the leaders of communism in Canada, it turns out Rose's name is Rosenberg and Carr's real name is Cohen. Just like Litvinov and Trotsky, they changed their names. But you'll notice it from now on, you can't help it. And ladies and gentlemen, once you notice the truth, you never can forget it. It's possible to convert from a lie to the truth. But I never heard of anybody, once having found the truth, going back to a lie. You'll never do it. No matter what you think of me tonight, no matter what you think of this speech, from now on you'll start noticing every time you see a communist group, you will begin to notice what the leaders look like and who they are. And you will discover they're members of the tribe. Who do you think is the head of a communist organization in this country that is so red, so leftist, and so traitorous that they call the Communist Party of Gus Hall a bunch of squares? Progressive Labor is the real, red-hot communist organization in this country, and the leader of it is a man named Jake Rosen. Does that sound Swedish to you? Every time I look around, wherever you go, wherever these communist operations are going, here are these Jewish people leading them. Now, those Jews are in the audience who are saying, oh, Rockwell, you ought to die. Instead of cussing me for telling the audience this, you ought to be saying those Jews are traitors to our race. If there's loyal Jews in this audience, and I'm sure there are, you should be deploring this, as good Italians deplore the mafia. You don't get punched in the nose for saying the mafia is Sicilian. It is. But you do get punched in the nose by these Jews for saying communism is Jewish. It is. I'm not saying all Jews are communists or all communists are Jews. That would be wicked and stupid. Just as it would be stupid to say because the mafia is Sicilian, it would be stupid and wicked to say all Sicilians are gangsters or all gangsters are Sicilians. But you all still know, in spite of those facts being true, it's still true that the mafia is a Sicilian operation. Communism, from Karl Marx, who was a Jew, Engels, LaSalle, right straight through all of these people that I've read, all through our spies now, right up to Leo Rosen, is a Jewish operation. And ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know that, you are not going to be able to deal with it realistically. You can't. Because the Jews are just be able to stifle everything about it that they don't want you to hear. And that's what's happened to me, ladies. What happened to me, they say I'm a hater and a bigot. Well, I don't see how it's bigotry when I find out that they've lied to me and I don't like it. Let me ask you this, ladies and gentlemen. Have you heard in your history courses in college or high school, did anybody ever mention the possibility that the Russian Revolution wasn't Russian, that it was Jewish? Maybe it's not true, but don't you think that such a strong possibility should be mentioned to you so you could think about it? But they cover it up. If you mention it, every once in a while when I'm at a college and there's a history professor up here, I ask them, why don't you mention that? And if they try to deny it, I beat them down with the facts. But they don't do it in the classroom. They don't tell you. It's not in your textbooks. And I think that's wrong. And incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, if you want it specially, when you send away, we put out a special reader's guide of suppressed books. Ask for it and have a ball. Watch the Jews suffer. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me show you. I'm going to wind this up by showing you what this is leading to, what is happening to your country. I haven't got half the time. I'd like to give you the total picture of all the horrors that this has led up to, but I haven't got the time. I can only tell you that they have lied to you so much that when you start hearing what's actually and really happening in your country, you know what I usually find in most audiences? They giggle. I'm going to give you an example. See it drop down here. I want to show you something that should shock you. You should just almost be panic-stricken, because when you finally realize the import of this thing, you will be. And I get many letters from every audience that they are. But usually when I first show this little exhibit to an audience, they titter, because it just doesn't seem possible. And I agree with you. But it's true. Now I'm going to show you this document here. This is the thing called the Crusader. put out in Cuba by a man named Robert Williams, the ex-head of the NAACP in Monroe, North Carolina. He led an armed rebellion down there. He kidnapped a white couple, and he fled to Cuba for refuge, from where he runs a thing curiously called Radio Free Dixie, broadcasting to the Negroes on how to make bombs and so forth. Now, this booklet here that I have was published before the rioting in Watts. And ladies and gentlemen, this is available from us in the packet. You read it and decide for yourselves, ladies and gentlemen, if this is not the blueprint for Watts and Cleveland and Chicago. Here it all is, tells them exactly what to do. You know what the most important thing he says to do is? He says you got to keep practicing the way they are, a little here and a little there, for the day when you can strike with Mau Mau terrorism all over the United States. And to do it, he says you've got to have one element that will absolutely destroy the white man. He says the white man has become soft. And I think he's right about this. I think the Negroes in the ghetto are tough. They're forced to do degrading, menial, hard physical labor. And they're in good, tough physical shape. Every time I go to jail, it's hard to survive. They're rough. And when I go out on the streets and I see these guys with their hair in their eyes all slinking around, a bunch of peace creep white guys, they look like girls. And they think it's bad and naughty to fight. They're ashamed to fight. They're scared to fight. Negroes aren't scared. They're not scared of knives. They're not scared of any kind of violence because every Friday and Saturday night they cut each other up for practice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this guy puts this thing out, and you know what he says is necessary to completely terrorize all you white people? He says you depend on technocracy, on all your technology, most of all on electricity. All over the Congo, all over the Portuguese Angola, wherever the terrorists tried to take over, the first thing they tried to get were the power stations. Because if they could black out a place in the night, in the darkness, the terror would be complete. It would be impossible to fight them. We would be shooting our own people. This was the technique. Black the place out. Now let me tell you something amazing about this book, The Crusader. It comes out every month or so by this guy Williams. He can't get it directly into the United States, so he sends it through Canada. And on the back here, it tells where you can get it, this little magazine here, in Canada. You can get it through Mrs. Ann, remember this name, Mrs. Ann Olson, 21 Ellis Gardens, Toronto 3, Ontario, Canada. This is where you can get this booklet telling about how to terrorize the white people by shutting off the electricity. Do you know where Mr. Olson works? Sir Adam Beck Power Plant, where the power failed and blacked out almost a quarter of the United States and all the northeastern section of Canada. I'm aware that this is a hard thing to believe. Right after it happened in the Northeast, it happened in the Southeast, it happened in the Northwest, it's happened all over the country. They're just checking to be sure they can do it, and they can. Ho, 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 ho. Well, those of you who are ho-ho-hoing, I think you'll find a lot of the audience are doing a little studying, and when they get done, they'll be wondering why you guys are ho-ho-hoing, just like me. This has happened in country after country all over the world, and you know what they're doing? The main element that they have to do in order to pull off this terrorism, the first thing they got to, I hate to sound like a bircher, but I'm going to have to. The first thing that's necessary in order to pull off their terrorism, ladies and gentlemen, is to destroy the police. So all over this country, you hear these people are making a battle cry out of the word police brutality. Anytime a police officer arrests a black man for anything, police brutality, that's all we hear. And meanwhile, these honest citizens, these poor oppressed people that are being brutalized by these terrible cops are plotting to destroy the police. Lock, stock, and barrel. Here is a booklet. This one is not available, by the way. We are printing it. I haven't got it available yet. We just got it. This is a document put out by the Internal Security Subcommittee of the United States Senate with captured communist documents showing black mobs taking over and killing the anti-riot forces of the police force. They're out to get the police. And although I have difficulties with the police, I always cooperate with them, and I find most of them are pretty decent guys trying to... I don't give a damn what you people think. The cops are doing a hell of a good job. They're up against terrific odds. They're not getting paid, and somebody ought to back them up, even if it's only me. But instead of that, what do you find? The communists and most of these Jewish love groups and all these people, these subversive people, attacking your police forces because it's all that stands between you and safety. That's all that protects you from this communist terrorism. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to wind up with the final worldwide picture and try to make it clear enough to you to see why eventually, what you saw on the screen behind me is going to become a reality, not only in this country but all over the world, because if it doesn't, you are going to be destroyed. Let me show you a matter of history in a different perspective than you've ever thought of it before. When I got back out of World War II as a fighter pilot, as I told you, I thought that I had finished forever the need for my people and my kids and my country ever again to have to go out and fight another horrible war like that. I couldn't believe that it could ever happen again, such a terrible war. Well, up in China, no sooner I got home than in China a guy rose up by the name of Mao Zedong. Now, some of you young folks are too young to remember this. Mao Zedong rose up in China, and do you know what happened, ladies and gentlemen? All these people went all over the country, these people that believe that there's no communist threat, and we shouldn't believe it. Now listen to this. They told us that Mao Zedong wasn't a communist. He couldn't be a communist. He was an agrarian reformer. Do you know who told us that? Dean Acheson, the president, Walter Lippmann, all the great pundits and geniuses of your country that are now telling you, for instance, that Rockwell is a bigot and a no good, and Welch is an extremist and a crazy man, and so forth. All these same people said Mao Zedong is not a communist. In fact, he's the George Washington of China. Dean Rusk, your President Secretary of State, got up at the University of Pennsylvania and made precisely that statement. He said he's not a communist, he's the George Washington of Cuba. Now remember, ladies and gentlemen, this guy that said this is now your Secretary of State. Boy, how wrong can you get? I remember at the time I wasn't even a conservative yet. By that time, I was just an ordinary, I think I was a Republican by that time. I'd begun to move a little at a time. So I came back here, and here I am a Republican, and I hear all these leaders of my country saying Mao Zedong is a good guy. There were 26 articles in a row in the Saturday Evening Post, which has been bought by the Zimbalist Jewish family. The Saturday Evening Post printed 26 articles in a row saying Mao Zedong could not be a communist. At the time, ladies and gentlemen, I remember a bunch of nuts and kooks, especially one called Joe McCarthy, and he was saying he is a communist. But of course, Eleanor was saying he couldn't be a communist. And we were being told by everybody else in the country that he couldn't be a communist. So these kooks, I believe, they must be terrible people. There must be something wrong with men that will go around lying about a guy like Mao Zedong, trying to ruin world relations and so forth. So in the name of helping agrarian reform, to help the peasants of Cuba, our government helped put in Mao Zedong. General Marshall went over there and boasted. He says, with a stroke of the pen, I disarmed 20 divisions of the Chinese Nationalist Army. 20 divisions we disarmed. We took all their arms away. Meanwhile, Russia was supplying Japanese arms by the ton and ton after ton to the Chinese communists. Chinese communism took over, and you should have heard Mr. Rusk and all these people be surprised, because no sooner had they taken over, Mao Zedong rose up and said, I'm a communist. I've always been a communist. He murdered 40 million people to thin out the Chinese population a little bit. That's a hell of a way to have an agrarian reform, is to kill all the peasants. That's what he did. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, you should have heard Eleanor. Oh, she says, what a surprise. How could this be? How could such a thing happen? Who would have thought he could have been a communist? He was absolutely astounded. All these people were amazed. They just couldn't understand it. Well, now, you wouldn't think anybody could be took twice on this deal, would you? And yet, ladies and gentlemen, it happened again. The next thing that happened, down in Cuba, they had a guy named Batista, and you should have read the propaganda. Some of you folks may remember this deal. Batista was well, let me finish out where I want right. Mr. Batista was a terrible guy, we were told, because every once in a while, every week or so, he'd kill somebody. He'd actually kill people down there. Of course, he was a Christian and pro-American and anti-communist, but that didn't matter because he was a dirty fascist who killed people. And not only that, but the peasants were oppressed. So in the name of the oppressed peasants, once again, we backed Mr. Castro, once again, Mr. Lippmann, Eleanor, Dean Rusk, Dean Acheson, everybody told us Castro couldn't be a communist. And by this time, I was a conservative and becoming a Nazi. And by this time, I was beginning to notice his record showed he was a communist, and I was one of the ones saying he is a red. Here's his record in Venezuela. He started a communist revolution. Here's the evidence. And yet all these top leaders that are now leading your country were once again wrong, just like they were with Mao Zedong. And they said, no, he's the George Washington of Cuba. So Mr. Castro took over with our help. He was taken to the United States with a triumphal tour all around Disneyland, I think he got. He was put on the Ed Sullivan Show. Ed Sullivan put his arm around him and said he's the George Washington of Cuba for 20 million people. He went right back down to Cuba and he held a Hate America parade. That was what he called it. He did cast every calumny on this country, and he said, I've always been a communist. And once again, Eleanor was, oh, how could it be? Walter Lippmann was just absolutely appalled. All these guys, Dean Rusk, Dean Acheson, all wrong again, and all us nutty conservatives, haters and bigots, every one of us right. Now, ladies and gentlemen, they're doing it right here in your country to you, and they got many of you helping for the best motives in the world. Get the picture. They always pick an oppressed group. In the name of the oppressed group, they set up these George Washingtons who are going to lead their people out of the land of Egypt into freedom. That's always their cry, freedom. And so, by the way, I might point out, well, I will later point out their war cry. They take this oppressed group. In the name of helping the oppressed group, they set up a communist tyranny. All your leaders tell you they couldn't be communists until finally the day comes when they were wide open as communists, and then all your leaders say, oh, we're surprised. Now, here in this country, you do have an oppressed group, ladies and gentlemen, but it's not peasants. Remember, in the other countries, they call it agrarian reform. China, agrarian reform. Cuban, agrarian reform. You don't need agrarian reform here because there's not millions of starving peasants. You do have an oppressed group, and it's black. Black people in this country have a rotten lot. Had I been a black man, I'd have been Malcolm X. And I have no respect for these hat-in-hand squirmer-inners and crawl-inners and sit-inners and wee-wee-inners. I have a lot of respect, as much as I'll fight them for Black Panthers and people who want to stand up for black power. I understand Stokely's going to speak here. Well, me and Stokely, sooner or later, are going to face each other over rifles, but at least I respect the man because he stands up for what he believes in. Well, now, anyway, what my point is, the black man has a rotten lot. He is oppressed. So in the name of the oppressed group, they have set up a movement called, not agrarian reform in this country, they call it civil rights. And most of the leaders have read records that long, just like Castro and just like Mao Zedong. But you're told by all the people like are standing up here, why, he couldn't be a communist. He's a preacher. He won the Nobel Prize. How could he be a commie? And I'm telling you his record of red affiliations is that long. I'm telling you that you have it right here on your own soil. You've had 2 strikes, ladies and gentlemen. 1 more and you're out because it's the last country in the world that can stand up to them. They're out to take over this country. I've showed you how they're doing it. I've showed you how they're blacking out so you don't know the information. I finally showed you how they've lied to you at least twice. These same people that are standing up here are people that are telling you now in Vietnam we're just protesting. We're not helping the enemy like hell. When they go out there and do everything they can to get worldwide publicity, the American people are down in the Vietnam War. They are killing Americans, and it's treason, and it ought to be stopped. It ought not to be tolerated another minute. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if we can't get our people woken up, if we can't get it stopped, we are going to lose our country, the greatest and finest country in the history of the world. And the only way I know to stop it is with enlightenment backed up by the guts to stand up to these people and fight them when they need it. And our slogan in doing it, ladies and gentlemen, is that the white people of this country have got to quit being intimidated and divided and conquered. Let me point out, in the Congo, they got a black country, and they won't tolerate a white leader. Let me ask you this. What do you think would happen to a bunch of you white folks that went over to the Congo and started running around hollering, "Get Blackie"? They'd eat you, ladies and gentlemen. But you're supposed to let them do it over here. What I'm getting at is, in this country, the blacks vote black. The Jews vote Jewish. Only the white people are stupid enough to divide themselves and cancel each other out into little Republican and Democrat teams, and you got to cut it out. If they vote black and they vote Jewish, you got to vote white, which is why I preach white power. When you stand together, the majority is supposed to rule in this country, and the majority is white and Christian. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to fight to see that we have majority rule in this country. I thank you very much. I thank you very much, and if they'll pass up the questions, I'll try to answer them.
Would the ushers please collect the questions from the audience? You have a little slip of paper on your programs to write questions.
He says pass up the slips of paper so we can get the questions in here. While they're doing it, ladies, while they're collecting the slips, I got something to show you. This is just a little encore here. While I got another document here. Somebody go collect them. They're down there with the slips. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to show you a document here from the Los Angeles Times, usually buried away. You know you have a lady here in California that's supposed to be the leader of the communist group here. This is the sort of thing that really shocks me that you don't know. You know about Dorothy Healy? Sounds like a nice Irish girl. Well, here it turns out Dorothy Healy's name is Dorothy Rosenblum. It's right here in the newspaper, and every time I start checking, this is what I find out. Well, now, give me some questions here, and I'll start answering. Oh, all right. They are now choosing the questions, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Don't wait too long. Let me have something here, even if it isn't good. They'll get ready because they just get up here. Now, do you want them to
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to...
They can't hear you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Dr. Robert Wohl of the History Department. He will be selecting and reading the questions. Dr. Wohl? Here.
Mr. Rockwell, let me read the first question. Why can't I burn American flags as part of the doctrine of free expression of ideas?
Well, I'll give you two answers to that. If anybody had even tried to burn an American flag during World War II, anybody, any place, would have stopped him and killed him, and the police would have helped him. And the second answer why you can't do it is if I get my hands on you, you won't be able to do anything else.
Mr. Rockwell, would you please elaborate on the Jewish communist collaborations of Mao Zedong?
Oh, now they really think they got me, don't they? Well, have you noticed there's a little difficulty going on between the boys in Russia and the boys in China? See, the boys in China are not quite so much communists as they are colored nationalists. They've kicked their Jews out in Red China, and they're having a difficulty with the place where the Jews are still thick over there in Moscow. The problem is that whenever the Communist Party starts kicking the Jews out, it becomes nationalist, and then they're in serious trouble with world communism.
Do you advocate murdering Jews even though you hate them?
I do not advocate murdering anybody. I know what this is going to. This goes back to the 6 million baloney. Everybody has been told so damn many times, and I believed it for years, that 6 million Jews were murdered, that you just can't doubt it. That's all you ever hear. Let me ask you something, ladies and gentlemen. Do you ever hear even 1 millionth, as much as you hear about the 6 million, do you ever hear about the 20 million Christians that Mr. Litvinov and Mr. Trotsky, or rather Mr. Bronstein and Mr. Finkelstein knocked off? 20 million, they boast about it. Do you ever hear anything about that? No. All you ever hear is the war propaganda about those 6 million Jews, and that's strictly propaganda to get you afraid to stand up and mention anything bad about Jews, because right away the tears start running down, and you're attacking these helpless people. Well, I don't think there's anything helpless about the Rosenbergs that gave the atom bomb to Russia that's now scaring all you peace creeps so much. I don't advocate murdering any innocent person, Jewish, black, or anything else.
Yes, okay. If the Russian Revolution was a Jewish revolution, and if many communists are Jewish, why are Jews being persecuted in the Soviet Union today?
This is right here. I have a clipping from the Washington Post, Friday, October 7th, 1966. Young Jews hail holiday in Moscow, and it says, thousands of young Jews danced and sang in the streets outside Moscow's great synagogue. This is not very often reported, but the Jews are doing just fine. The problem with them is the Russian communists are atheists. They despise religion. They're persecuting all religions, not just Jews, but they're persecuting Baptists, Catholics, anybody who is religious is being persecuted. It's just that the Jews yell louder than anybody else. What's happened is the atheist Jews are persecuting the religious Zionist Jews. This is not anti-Semitism. It's simply a little family argument going on.
Do you communicate with the neo-Nazi party arising in West Germany?
I don't dare. That'd be the quickest way to kill it. all they would have to do, all that would be necessary to ruin that party would be for them to find one letter from George Lincoln Rockwell, say, hey, you're doing great, fellas, keep it up, or do so-and-so. And they would say, now, you see, this is a front for Rockwell, or it's part of this big They're trying to prove that it's a Nazi movement, in other words. The minute they do, they can't have their party. It's forbidden, verboten in Germany to be a Nazi. My people all go to jail. The open Nazis in my group. I see Tuvim Friedman or somebody, Rosenthal, some Jew says he's just turned over the names of 450 of my people to the authorities. Well, he doesn't have to. My people are all open, and most of them are in jail for it.
If Playboy misrepresents your views through editing and exclusion of facts, why haven't you sued them for libel?
The answer is, ladies and gentlemen, they confronted with me the fait accompli. They were supposed to give me galley proofs. I was driving across the desert near Amarillo, called my headquarters to see if there were any messages, and they said that Playboy had called and to call Playboy. I called Playboy, and they said, Mr. Rockwell, it's too late to send you galley proofs. I'm going to read you the story over the telephone and tell us if you like it. Well, how can you correct anything over the telephone? So they read me over the telephone, and I tried to do the best I could, and a lot of the things I asked for, of course, they didn't do. When they finally sent me anything at all, it was page proofs, and they said, the presses are rolling. You have your choice. You can either stop the interview entirely, and they would have had to do it, or you can release the page proofs. So I chose to take the calculated risk of letting all that misrepresentation out, because otherwise I would have lost 8 million readers. And the hardest thing in the world for me to do is reach anybody with anything. I need outlets to be able to invite it to get to colleges to speak, for instance. So I chose being misrepresented to get publicity.
Some prominent and non-Jewish and non-communist historians have stated that Hitler's legitimate father probably was partially Jewish, making him 1/4 Jewish. It is also said that Hitler knew of this and tried to suppress this fact. What is your comment on this?
Well, all I can say is that if the Jews are now trying to take credit for Hitler, then they got everybody. There's nobody left. They already got Christ and Marx and Freud and everybody else. I guess they're really trying to get horned in on everything. And I would say further, they scream he's the worst man that ever lived, practically the devil himself. Well, if he turns out to be Jewish, then they're cutting their own throats with this kind of propaganda.
You talk of the Jewish race. I have never heard an anthropological professor, talk of the Jewish race. Please elaborate on your concept of the Jewish race.
All right, sir, I'll be happy to do that. If we had a blackboard here, having been a commercial artist of some skill and won some prizes at it and so forth, if we had a blackboard here, I could start drawing faces on the blackboard. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I could not draw a face that any of you would recognize as a Protestant or a face that you'd recognize as a Catholic, but if I drew a certain type of profile with a big hook nose, right away, you'd all know what it was. Now, do you think you grow that nose, ladies and gentlemen, and that Jewish look by going to a synagogue? Do you think you could look like that? Do you think you could look like that by going to a synagogue? The Jews are recognizable, not all of them, but some of them. You can look at them and they look like Jews, like Harry Golden. Now, don't tell me that this is not a group of biological extraction.
The evidence...
Oh, excuse me, wait a minute. Somebody says, you know, Harry Golden, let me show you how these people lie. Harry Golden wrote a column up in San Francisco when I was up there, and Harry Golden says, I used to know Rockwell's old man, Doc Rockwell, really good. He was a pretty good guy. In fact, he says, Groucho Marx was Rockwell's godfather. Well, now stop and think. Groucho Marx is a Jew. My family was Christian. You know what a godfather is supposed to do? He promises to bring you up a Christian. Now, how can a Jew be the godfather and promise to bring me up as a Christian when he's a Jew? And this is what Harry Golden told him.
The evidence you presented from the directories of American and world Jewry is fallacious. A person is considered Jewish by Jews when the mother was a Jew, regardless of whether they are really Jewish or not. That is, Apteker is not really Jewish. He is in the directory because his mother was Jewish. Please comment.
Well, all I can say, ladies and gentlemen, in many cases, the Jews take credit for Karl Marx. Whenever they want to show how intellectual they are, they take credit for Karl Marx, who was an apostate Jew and wrote a book called A World Without Jews and hated them and so forth. I have seen the Jews taking credit for people who have only Jewish fathers, or people, well, they claim Marilyn Monroe is a Jew. She didn't have a Jewish mother. And Sammy Davis is a Jew, although he doesn't look like a Jew. He looks like something else to me.
Why do you carry the tape recorder under your jacket when you speak?
Wherever I speak, ladies and gentlemen, I tape every word of every interview because I am lied about every day, every hour, every minute so much. The only way I can prove it is to have the tape. I have the complete tape of the Playboy interview. And anytime any journalist would like to find out whether I'm telling the truth, I can present him with the whole interview. Anybody who says that I came here in this audience and said all Jews are communists or all communists are Jews, which you'll probably read in the paper tomorrow, I got the tape to show they're lying.
Now, this is a rather long one, but I think you'll want to answer it. The Russian Communist Party purged millions. If it is composed of powerful Jews, then it necessarily follows that the Jews have a cohesive, highly organized body in the form of the Russian Communist Party. In a like manner, you contend that there is an extremely powerful Jewish faction in America. But if they are so powerful and selfishly inclined, why haven't they purged you?
Well, they sure are trying. They just today tried to throw me 3 months in the clink, and they've been doing it every place I go. Martin Luther King goes all through Chicago tearing the whole place up last summer, and he doesn't even get threatened with arrest. They tell me on the national television they're going to arrest me on sight. And the sheriff says he'll think of some charges afterwards. I go up to his office, and he arrests me. Now they're going to try to put me in jail for 3 months. They try to purge me as much as they can. Mr. Cohen, the Internal Revenue people, sends 8 big goon squads into my place and just locks it up and grabs everything. I got no recourse. There's nothing I can do. I'm too poor and little. If you don't think they're trying to run me out of business and purge me, you ought to see. If we're going to quit, I want to mention one thing. I noticed there's one question that's been dumped here in the garbage. Somebody asked, what is the title of your book and where can you get it? I guess they don't want me to answer that, so I won't. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good night.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you found the program educational.